Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today, we're going to talk about things that characters should and should not say. Specifically, this is in relation to the last Mass episode. I had Twilight Sparkle call somebody retarded, or just generally use the word, and then I had a couple of people in the comments say like, I dislike slurs, and then somebody posted something in the on my Tumblr, and they were just like, why would you do this? And I replied and I said, well, you know, the entire point of Mass is that there's a certain amount of juxtaposition with the cheery positivity of the show originally, and you know, like we kind of turned it around. We say like, oh, what if instead of everybody being accepting and terrible, or accepting and great, actually it is kind of terrible how accepting everyone is. It's very saccharine. What if instead they were sort of mean and vindictive and stuff like that? And so I said like, so you know, there are these characters that would say this, but Twilight Sparkle called somebody retarded as a slur. Because the way that I depict the character in Mass is that she values intelligence above everything else. So to her, insulting someone's intelligence or implying that they're like impaired in some way is a really like serious insult. Whereas certain other characters would never use it, or like Rainbow Dash is afraid to even say the words like hell or damn or whatever. Like those are bad words. You go to pony hell if you say those kinds of words, and so Dash doesn't want to go to pony hell. So, yeah, I made the reply to it, and it's generally not that as big of a deal, I think, as some people like to make it out to be. The only reason I'm doing this video is because after I replied to that comment, somebody asked me if I'd do a personal time about it on my thoughts on the whole thing. And to preface the entire thing, the first thing you have to remember is that there's not really a good blanket rule for this sort of thing. Because whenever you're using words that people might find offensive, or you're touching on topics that people might find offensive, you have to remember it depends a lot on context, both what you as a writer know and what your show is depicting, and how people are going to read that, like if you go along. There are people who are going to misread anything you make, no matter what you make. I mean, you can make the most innocuous, normal stuff. I remember when Teletubbies came out, and there was this group that rose up to oppose Teletubbies because they were like, Twinkie Winkie is gay. I'm not sure if it was Twinkie Winkie. I only remember Poe. Poe was the red one. But yeah, Teletubbies probably, I don't know if everyone is familiar with Teletubbies, but it was a children's show. It was for babies. It was for like very, very young kids. Like the Teletubbies didn't even speak English. They just ran around and they went on magical adventures. And one of the Teletubbies, they all had shapes on their heads. And one of the Teletubbies had a triangle on his head, and he had a magic bag, which somebody interpreted like a triangle is one of the symbols for like the gay Foreign Legion. I can't recall the gay pride. I don't. The gay Foreign Legion, and the gay Foreign Legion is of course gay, which this group thought was terrible and needed to be stopped. And he had a purse, which they also thought was rather gay. And I'm not sure if the Teletubbies are even gendered at all. So it was a little bit of a weird thing. But this guy came forward, and I think the rebuttal from the show creators was pretty amusing, if I recall. Or maybe it was a comedian who said this, but a friend of mine told me that the rebuttal from the show creators was that this guy was like, oh, you know, Tinky Winky is part of the gay Foreign Legion, and he has a gay handbag, and we need to stop all this gayness before it corrupts babies. And so one of the show creators replied like, it's not a purse, it's a magic bag, and I don't know what you keep in your magic bag, but whatever it is, I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't smoke it while watching our show, because you're insane. So point being, no matter what you say, no matter what you do, there's going to be someone who gets offended. That's just kind of the rule about being on the media, and the internet has only made that much worse. It's demagoguery, you know. This is one of these things I've talked before about. This and that, and I've always kind of tried to phrase it in like negativity, or I've talked about like feminism, and then kind of like I don't know like what branch of feminism it is that's mad about everything, but you know, it occurred to me not long ago that the big thing that's popular right now, it's not even really like feminism, it's not really like human rights, it's not really like equality, it's not about any of that, it's all just demagoguery. The internet has gotten to where they just love to make these very shallow appeals to your emotion and then try to call for action, you know. Donate to my cause, give me money. Kind of winds up being the deal. So there are people who will get offended for silly reasons, you know, just because they're silly people. And then there are like clever people who will get offended for money. You know, send me money, send me support, da-da-da-da-da, and that's how it is. So, you know, those people you can't get around. But then there's also questions of, like, what age is your audience, and who you're targeting, what are you trying to say? So, for example, in something like kid shows, when you get into like racial slurs, I think it's very safe to say and very reasonable to say that you probably shouldn't be using those in any context at all, really. Just because like kids don't really have a very firm grasp of this and that, and I personally feel like it's probably better to foster a sense of like community, to have kids grow up feeling like everyone is kind of in the same boat is a better way to go. Because like I went to school, and I actually my region is kind of weird, is that there's still like segregation city-wise, but like the schools are less segregated. You have to think like segregation in the U.S. only ended about a generation or two ago, so it's not that weird that stuff is still like that, and everyone's kind of like moving into areas, and there's sort of more intermixing and stuff like that. But when I was a kid, we had it was like majority white, but then we had like black kids, and then there were some Asian kids and whatever. And growing up in that sort of environment, you get to thinking for most of your young life that just like any type of kid is gonna be around, and you don't get quite as much of the race stuff, or at least I didn't. I don't know if anyone else in my area did, but it wasn't until about middle school, I think, that kids started to really start thinking about race. And I remember like there was this girl that came in, and she I believe she'd been passed around from school to school because she just had these attitude problems, and I think it led her to getting bullied. So she showed up, and she just had this like persona. And what she had done, and I figured this out not very long after being around her, is what she had done is she would watch a lot of BET. And I don't think that she came from like the hood or anywhere like that, but she had adopted this persona. Like she'd been watching BET, and I remember her just like sitting down in class with this girl that I'd gone to like grade school with, and she had like a regional, like this other black girl had like the same regional accent that I did. She'd been to all the class, she'd been like hanging around, like all her friends were white except for like one or two other kids. I don't know. And so she just didn't like, she wasn't like, oh, I'm black, like I have to act black. But this other girl comes in, and she just sits down, she starts making fun of this other girl for like, oh, like you aren't black, look at you, listen to you, whitey, like wanna be black, like, oh, you're an Oreo or whatever, you're black on the outside but white on the inside. And just started like deriding her and all these things. And I remember like middle school was about when I started to see that, and about when people started thinking like their skin color made some kind of difference, like they'd all grown up in the same area, we all kind of spoke the same. And then some kids, the ones who were more insecure, took to that, and they were influenced by that, and they started to wanna I don't know, like fit in with that sort of weird mentality. And like I say, what I caught on with this girl was that I realized that she was watching BET because she used to tell a lot of jokes about like living in the ghetto or whatever. And like I remember watching I used to really like the comedy shows when I was young, and so I would watch like sometimes the BET channel would do like comedy shows, and so I was like watching a couple of comedy routines, and then one day I heard this girl like repeating their comedy routine like verbatim. She was just repeating this comedy routine. She'd like just stolen this guy's like I don't know, it was like Cat Williams. It wasn't Dave Chappelle. That would have been too popular. She wouldn't have gotten away with that. I think that was high school. But anyway, or high school for me, that is. But anyway, though, it was just like some black comedian. I can't remember who it was, and she was just repeating his set verbatim. And the other thing that threw me about this girl is I noticed that although she was always talking about being poor, and she was talking about like like you don't notice the hole in your ceiling until you're sitting on the toilet, and this and that, she never showed up wearing the same outfit like twice. She had a lot of clothes. Like this girl, I don't think that this girl came from a poor family. I think that she might have come from maybe some, like, her family might have been kind of wealthy actually, but she just put on this face. So younger kids, like that sort of like cusp of when they're sort of discovering themselves and finding themselves, I can see why parents would be maybe a little bit more concerned about like how do you talk to kids, like the words that you use, like racial slurs and things like that. Like do you want to impress upon people that like your skin color really makes a difference? Because that's actually the entire purpose of racial slurs. And it's a valid and meaningful question, and it's one that's difficult in media, because if you start thinking about that sort of thing, like the sweet spot for any media project is usually going to be about PG-13, because that means basically everyone that matters is going to watch it. Like little kids, it's hard to write for little kids and also write for adults. It is done from time to time, but if you think about like Animaniacs, which was technically targeted at kids, a lot of those jokes only hit adults, and so on and so forth. And so like writing on a level where you don't miss out, like even when you write adult jokes into a kid's show, a lot of times the adult jokes are just going way over the kids' heads. So PG-13 is kind of that sweet spot, and that means that a lot of times when traditional media is going for PG-13, they find themselves unable to tackle things like slurs and whatnot because, like I say, you don't really want to foster a sort of this these very negative, just pointlessly negative kind of feelings. And of course, if you're gonna do it at all, a lot of times they try to do it in a slightly more delicate way, where they'll have like an episode where they have like a black kid in the show, and then somebody calls him, like they make fun of his skin color, and then it'd be like, why would they do that? And then they have the whole episode is like about them tackling like, why would somebody use a word like that? And so yeah, so for kids, I can see where people kind of come from and where they take issue with things. The internet is slightly different, though. The internet has opened up a lot of doors to where it's kind of like you're not necessarily hitting for a particular audience. What people do now on the internet is they sort of aim for, like, they write for themselves, kind of, a lot of times is what they do. Like, when I write mass, I write jokes that I find funny and that I think other people will enjoy. But I'm not aiming for, like, this is my demographic, and I'm trying to hit these groups, and then I'm going to tell the advertisers, like, oh, this is who I'm aiming for, and whatnot. Because advertising on YouTube, as we've all seen, has just gone down gradually, and has recently collapsed, like, in a more catastrophic way, but it's been going down. Like, advertising on YouTube has consistently gone down. So it feels rather silly to kind of look at the whole thing and say, like, this is specifically who my comedy is for, and, I want the advertisers to be aware that, like, we're appealing to kids, 13 and up, or whatever. It's kind of more like just I write what I write, I say what I say, and people who don't enjoy it, they won't watch it. There's like a million other things for them to watch, and that's kind of the mentality. It may not be the most business-savvy mentality, but that's the way that a lot of people approach things, and that's also why everyone is very angry that YouTube is now trying to crack down and get people's channels rated adults only, or whatever. And YouTube is actually perhaps less lenient than TV is sometimes about what you would consider adults only. It depends. They push the envelope. Sometimes they get away with things. Sometimes they don't. It depends on whether or not you upset people on the ratings board, which is an arbitrary sort of board. But people are really upset now because YouTube is trying to kind of push this. And I think they're being so harsh because advertisers don't really have a firm idea of what they're showing up on. And the other thing that's weird is that YouTube is, ironically, while most of us who use YouTube, because we're becoming less and less reliant on ads, or have to be, because the value of ads continues to decline, year after year, and we've had this big crash recently. Most YouTubers are less reliant on ads, but YouTube needs to run more ads to make up for the decline in their value. And that's why I believe that YouTube has switched over to the system of rewarding channels that produce just like hour after hour after hour of schlock every single day. Because they're producing high volume, which means that YouTube can run tons and tons of ads. And I'm sure they'd be happier if they were running ads on quality entertainment, but quality entertainment takes a while, and they can't run a billion ads on a single quality thing because only 10 million people will watch a really good video. But, you'll get 10 million views on, like, 10 mediocre videos as well, so they'd rather you just, like, produce 30 mediocre videos versus one video every 3 months. Anyway, though, a bit of a tangent going into the advertising stuff, but anyway, this is where we're starting to get into, like, YouTube now is at odds with creators as to what you can say and what you can do, because they're trying to appeal to advertisers. And we're sort of going back to that system where, again, like, because YouTube cares so much about advertisers, YouTubers who rely on ads have to suddenly care about advertisers and what they think. And virtually all of them are being squeezed into the PG-13 thing, and now they're freaking out because they don't want to do PG-13. That said, if you're considering supporting us on Patreon, that's actually how we make all of our money. I don't push the Patreon very often, except with blurbs at the end, so there's a good time to plug that anyway, I suppose. Anyway. So as far as how I feel that those kinds of things should be used, they should be used in a very pragmatic way with some appreciation for the people who are sensitive about that kind of thing. Like I say, someone is always going to be morally offended, so you can't be afraid of offending people when you're making media. You're going to upset someone. Even if it's one crazy person in a tinfoil hat, they're gonna be angry. So, you've got to say what you're going to say, but you've also got to appreciate the criticism of, like, do you really need to use all these slurs? If you're intentionally trying to shock people, for example, then racial slurs are a way to go. I don't personally think that this is a very sustainable form of entertainment, just shocking people. Because the trouble is that if you use, like, for example, if you use a racial slur, like, over and over and over again, eventually it ceases to have meaning to the audience and it's not shocking anymore. And you could say that this is an angle that you're going for, but the trouble with that I've come to find is that, like, if you look at, say, 4chan, which used to be very irreverent and kind of like what you'd see, like, the N-word all over the site, and it was always used kind of like with irreverence, like they'd have people who would show up and they'd just be like, this is so and so, or just like jokes that were really funny. But eventually you got people who felt that they were kind of in a comfortable space where they could use these slurs and be serious, be sincere about it, and then it got to be less of a joke and it got to be kind of more real, which I think was disappointing. So I'm not sure that as a strategy that overusing slurs actually makes them more acceptable. I think that probably, at best, if you want to occasionally shock your audience, you have to be responsible and use the words occasionally, and have them show up in situations that are going to be shocking and intentionally appalling. And in that way, if people call in and they're mad, you did it on purpose. You made them angry on purpose, and maybe you did it for controversy. Maybe you're recording something, courting some controversy. And in fact, we've seen this with PewDiePie lately. He's been in hot water now and again. And he's weird because, like, he's right in that he keeps talking about how, oh, well, the media will just report on anything I say, regardless of whether or not what they say is true. Like, he'll joke about something and they'll take it as sincerity. But the kind of stuff that he's doing is he's purposefully tap dancing on this sort of fine line, where, like, he got in trouble for hiring some guys to write, like, "Death to the Jews" or something like that, or it was some anti-Semitic message. I don't recall what it was. Some anti-Semitic thing, and he paid them to do this, and they waved around this banner. And then a bunch of news people got on it, and they were like, "Oh, PewDiePie, anti-Semitism, so on and so forth." And he's obviously not going to keep doing that, because if it became what his channel was all about, eventually he would just disgust people. And once they got used to it and they weren't shocked and outraged anymore, they would leave, because it's a tiresome thing to see that kind of like shock humor is just exhausting after a while. It's emotionally tiring. So eventually people are going to leave, but for the time being, that temporary moment, he got in the news, he made headlines, like everyone was talking about, like, oh, PewDiePie is an anti-Semite, PewDiePie is a Nazi, da-da-da-da-da, and it brought up the view count on his videos. Which is funny. It's funny to me because he wouldn't have to do this if it weren't for the fact that YouTube changed the way that they promoted his content in the first place. If they just kept going the way they would have. I think they made the change because of people like Leafy is here, who is just like shock content all the time. He's always just tearing into people, trying to upset people. It's kind of awful. But anyway, though. So yes, so that kind of thing, you can say there's actually a certain amount of legitimate strategy. Maybe not a pure and wholesome sort of thing. Maybe not something, like PewDiePie was obviously not thinking about how kids are going to interpret that. Or at least he wasn't thinking about, like, his impression on children. I'm pretty sure that he looks at it with a certain amount of irreverence and says, like, well, what are kids going to think about it? Like, kids aren't that stupid. They're not going to be, they're not that impressionable. And to some extent, that's true. But, like I say, it shouldn't happen often enough that it really does fall within the realm of acceptable behavior. We should still be at least, cognizant of the fact that this is rude, and should be treated like it's rude. Yes. So anyway, though, so there's that where you can use it on purpose to like create shock, and then finally, like, I think if you want to go all the way and you want to use like slurs and things like that to create grittiness, which is a little bit more what I was doing with Mass. I don't feel like using the word retard was really all that gritty. It's commonly used by a lot of people. The word retard is interesting because if you look at mental handicaps, virtually every word to describe a mental handicap has been used as a slur. And it gets taken over, like it becomes more synonymous as a slur. It becomes more thought of as a slur than it does with anything else. For example, the word stupid used to mean mentally handicapped. The word idiot used to mean mentally handicapped. And people now use the word retarded to insult people's intelligence. And people, you find, many people view intelligence more highly than they view any other trait. I mean, like, if you're fast, if you're strong, that's great. But as you get older, that's going to pass away. But your intellect is something that a lot of people feel like you have and you keep for your entire life, and they respect it a lot. So being mentally handicapped, I think, is viewed as a very serious detriment, and it's a very undesirable trait. So it just continually, every time they come up with a new word to describe mentally handicapped, it gets passed around as an insult. It's to say, like, well, you're at a disadvantage. And I think mentally handicapped was one that started to turn around, like, when I was very young. Maybe before. I'm not actually sure. But I don't know. It's one of those ones that's weird because I find that I've talked to different people who, like, kind of they've worked with mentally handicapped kids, and there's, like, this evolving sense of always just trying to get away from those words being insults. So it's like, oh, don't use, like, he's not retarded, he's mentally handicapped, and then people they would say, like, oh, well, are you mentally handicapped? Or it's like, are you like there is a, I have to admit, I actually kind of like like, Down syndrome used to be called, like, Mongoloid syndrome or whatever, and, like, Mongoloid is actually very... If you're coming up with, like, a weird insult with a lot of flair to insult someone's intelligence, I have to admit, like, Mongoloid is one of those, like... It's kind of like... It's, like, one of those very archaic, like, interesting things that you could call someone. So sometimes, I think that even for comedic effect, you can use something like that, where, like, if some character were to freak out and just be like, shut up, you Mongoloid! And they, like, they blow up, and they just completely lose control. Those kinds of, like, almost those very archaic sort of insults are funny and interesting, and because you don't really see them very much anymore, they're not really common vernacular. They're a little bit surprising and they're funny, which again, use them sparingly, and they kind of have some value. At least in a comedic sense, if you're, being tactful about it. But yeah, as far as, like, mass goes, like I've always been fairly PG. Like, I try to keep everything relatively PG-13. So I'm not, like, I can't really blame people for being bothered by me using that slur in mass, because I very rarely use any kind of foul language. I remember I dropped the F-bomb once, and then I just, like, got a whole bunch of comments, and people were like, oh my god, like, my ears are ringing, did you just drop an F-bomb? Like, it was a really casual F-bomb, too, like, I just, like, slipped it in there. Like, some characters said something, and then someone else just replied, like, are you messing with it? And it was just, like, there was the F-bomb, and everyone was just like, oh my god, like, what? Like, that came out of nowhere, like, I wasn't expecting that. And, I'll be honest, maybe I probably shouldn't have done that, because my whole channel tends to be so PG-13, and maybe, like, blindsiding people like that, like I say, it has power and it has value, and I feel like you should, as a creator, be able to do it occasionally, because it provokes an emotional reaction, and it's new, and it's novel, and it's stupid. So when you're doing comedy, it's kind of fun, in a way. But at the same time, like, suppose that somebody's like, oh, like suppose that somebody's mom, like, barely tolerates their 13-year-old child watching my stuff. Like, they're right at that age where they're starting to, like, learn swear words, and like I remember when I was young, I had friends that, like, learned swear words, and they just mixed them in with everything. It was like, I am an adult now, like, I can put a knife, like the Eddie Izzard joke, I can put knives in the toaster, knives, forks in the bathtub, like, everything, and yeah, like, they're old enough now. No one can stop them from using the F word. And, of course, they get in trouble if they use it in front of their mom. But they don't want me to be the one. Like, if they trust me to entertain their teenager, they don't want me to be the one who teaches them that word. Odds are, if they have an older brother, it's too late. They already know a lot more than the parents realize. But that's actually where I learned a lot of my terrible stuff. I had a friend who had an older brother. His older brother taught him everything, and then he taught me everything. So that's actually how it generally goes. And this is one of the things, though, is where you talk about, like, should media encourage kids? When you get down to it, I feel like TV can have some influence. Like, it can make kids want to emulate things to a certain extent, but everything is so context heavy, and everything is kind of all about how you say it and what you're trying to do, what is your plan. You have to look everything in this grand picture, and it's very difficult to paint a broad rule or say that this is the way things always are, or to say, like, well, anytime you use an F-bomb, you're going to be influencing, millions of kids. Or, like, if a million kids hear you say the F-bomb, if you use it in a context that's upsetting, or, like, your bad guy uses it, and then everyone's like, oh, like, that's bad, and you're going to be punished. Like, if you think about that, like, bad guys using bad words, I think, is probably a lot more acceptable in the context of teaching. But anyway, though, the bottom line is, like, I keep talking about kids, and maybe young kids and young teenagers, But I think that there's a very narrow window once you get to, like, I don't know, 16, where probably it doesn't matter what you say for the most part, because at that point everyone is old enough to kind of at least grasp, you know, all right, this is right and this is wrong, and they know that if you're using a slur, they know that if you're using a slur, it's a slur, and that it's inappropriate and that it's rude. And at that point, you know, like, I can't lecture to, like, a 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old, anyone who's, like, an adult and watching my material and hears me drop that F-bomb. They've heard the F-bomb a million times before, probably from people with worse tempers than myself, probably in worse situations. They probably heard racial slurs, they've heard everything else. So as for adults, like, from an adult to adult perspective, when you're speaking between adults, I feel like it's a little bit silly to try and police someone's language and say, like, you know, Greg, you can't use that language. Like, it's understandable if you feel like it's rude, you don't like to hear it because it's like, it's just kind of uncouth, like, you know, it doesn't display a lot of intellect, but that's more of an interpersonal thing, where it comes to, like, yeah, like, adults are adults. Like, adults are not going to be quite as impressioned as children are. And again, we don't know exactly how much this kind of stuff impressions children, but if you only have a precious 20 or 30 minutes to teach them something, you may as well be teaching them something better. And that's the bottom line, is I guess it's really about opportunity cost than it is, more than it is about, like, whether or not you should say it. Like, if you can hold their attention, why not teach them something good instead of something bad? Because, you know, hey, like, it's great that you can hold them for 15 minutes. Like, some parents can't even do that for their own kids. They're boring, very boring parents. You guys gotta like, you gotta hold sparklers, wave them around, be like, look, I'm talking to you. Clean the bathtub. Go. Throw the sparklers in the bathtub. They'll chase them down. So, probably not. But yeah. So anyway, though, like I say, this is not really a guide on, like, what should you do, what shouldn't you do. You may have different opinions, and that's fair. Like, I can respect the people who feel like slurs should never be used, even minor slurs. I personally don't think that, like, I think it's rather fruitless to try to completely police language. People are always going to find ways to insult each other. If you get rid of words, it doesn't mean that people can't think certain things. People can't, you know, they're not automatically prohibited from having a negative opinion just because you prevent them or suppress them. You know, so what can I say? Like I said, I think it's kind of fruitless to try and fight it indefinitely. But if you're worried about whether or not kids are going to hear me say something, that's fair. I can see that. So, you know, yeah. What I say, there's no perfect answer. This is just how it is. It depends on how you write, depends on what you want to do. The only thing I can say is you shouldn't use slurs and foul language or even touch racy or challenging material unless you really have a plan and you're willing to be at least thoughtful and considerate about it. And that's the main thing. As long as you use your head, then at least you can be, you know, appreciated for trying to think about it and asking yourself what you're doing at the very least. So yeah, I suppose that'll be it for today. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I will catch you all next time.